Good afternoon, everyone. This is the news with b.c.begley. I am your host, and it's Thursday, October the 9th of 2025, and here are your top news stories for today. Former FBI Director James Comey pleaded not guilty to charges of making false statements and obstructing a congressional proceeding. His lawyer, Pat Fitzgerald, entered the plea during Comey's arraignment in Alexandria, Virginia, where a trial date was set for January 5th of 2026. The charges stem from Comey's 2020 Senate testimony, and his indictment came soon after President Donald Trump pressured prosecutors to accelerate their investigation. The Justice Department replaced the lead prosecutor on the case with Trump aide Lindsey Hooligan, who secured the indictment and brought in outside prosecutors, NPR has reported. Comey's legal team plans to seek dismissal of the case, arguing it reflects a vindictive and politically motivated prosecution. 9 months after a devastating wildfire swept through Los Angeles, killing 12 people and destroying thousands of homes and businesses, authorities have now arrested a suspect in Florida. Jonathan Rinderknecht, 29, faces a federal charge of destruction of property by fire in connection with the Palisades fire. Prosecutors allege that Rinderknecht, a former Uber driver, showed an obsession with fire, including watching rap videos featuring flames and prompting ChatGPT to generate dystopian images of burning forest. He appeared in federal court in Orlando, where a public defender was appointed, and his detention hearing was continued to Thursday, CNN has reported. If convicted, Rinderknecht could face up to 20 years in prison. Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a U.S.-brokered ceasefire that includes the release of all hostages in Gaza, an Israeli troop withdrawal to a designated point, and the release of some Palestinian prisoners. U.S. President Donald Trump announced the deal, saying hostages could be freed as early as Monday, though key issues like Hamas disarmament and Gaza's future governance remain unresolved. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the agreement as a, quote, diplomatic success and a national and moral victory. Hamas expressed gratitude to President Trump and mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, CNN has reported. Celebrations erupted in both Gaza and Israel, though many residents remained cautious that the fragile deal could still collapse. A federal appeals court on Wednesday temporarily lifted a lower court order that blocked President Trump from federalizing Oregon National Guard troops, though he still cannot deploy them in the state. The Ninth Circuit's administrative stay pauses U.S. District Judge Karen Emmergut's earlier ruling that the court considers the administration's appeal maintaining the status quo in which the troops are federalized but not deployed. Emmergut had found Trump's justification for the call-up, quote, untethered to the facts, and barred the deployment of 200 Oregon troops, prompting President Trump to attempt to send troops from California and Texas instead. Oregon, joined by California, sued to prevent any federalized National Guard deployment in Portland, arguing it violated state sovereignty and blurred the line between military and civilian law enforcement. The appeals panel, consisting of 2 Trump appointees and 1 Clinton appointee, will hear further arguments on Thursday on whether to extend the pause while the case proceeds. Roughly 500 National Guard members have been deployed in the Chicago area under orders from President Donald Trump to protect ICE facilities and agents. The force includes about 200 troops from Texas and 300 from Illinois, mobilized for a 60-day mission based out of Elwood, Illinois. The deployment has sparked legal challenges, with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker suing to block it, arguing the federal government overstepped state authority. Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Trump defended the move as necessary to protect federal personnel and property, while J.B. Pritzker denounced the president's threats to have him arrested, NBC5 Chicago has reported. A federal judge is set to rule on Thursday on the legality of the deployment, amid reports that the Trump administration is considering invoking the Insurrection Act to expand federal law enforcement powers. With less than a month before Election Day, Democratic Representative Mikey Sherrill and Republican Jack Ciattarelli clashed fiercely in their final debate for the New Jersey governor. The candidates traded personal attacks. Cheryl accused Ciccarelli of profiting from the opioid crisis, while he alleged that she broke disclosure laws and questioned her military record. The debate also focused on state issues such as taxes, energy cost, and immigration, though both repeatedly invoked President Donald Trump, whose endorsement of Ciccarelli loomed large. The race has been further inflamed by a controversy over Cheryl's naval record, which were improperly released and are now under federal investigation, Fox News has reported. With New Jersey's gubernatorial elections historically competitive, the outcome is seen as an early test of President Trump's influence and a key signal ahead of the 2026 midterms. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene broke with the GOP leaders on Wednesday, urging Speaker Mike Johnson to reconvene the House amid the ongoing government shutdown and rising tensions over health care policy. During an interview with CNN, Greene warned that Republicans risk voter backlash if they fail to address surging health insurance costs tied to the expiration of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. She criticized both parties, blaming Democrats for creating the crisis and Republicans for lacking solutions, and called Johnson's decision to keep the House out of session a, quote, mistake. Greene's remarks deepen her rift with GOP leadership as she continues to take controversial stances, including opposition to the U.S. aid for Ukraine and criticism of Israel's war in Gaza, CNN has reported. While affirming her support for President Donald Trump, Greene said she was focused on protecting her constituents from skyrocketing health care premiums and warned that, quote, nobody is winning the political fight over the shutdown. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem sharply condemned Antifa during a White House roundtable on Wednesday, comparing the group to international terror organizations such as ISIS and Hezbollah. Speaking alongside President Donald Trump and other top officials, Noem claimed Antifa operates as a, quote, sophisticated network, intent on destroying American society and endangering law enforcement and civilians. She said recent arrests in Portland were helping investigators uncover more about what she called a, quote, domestic terror network. President Trump opened the discussion by labeling Antifa a major left-wing threat and suggested he might move to designate the group as a foreign terrorist organization, Fox News has reported. Reporters at the event, who had covered Antifa-related violence, thanked the administration for acknowledging what they described as the group's organized and dangerous activities. Speaker Mike Johnson clashed with the Democratic Senators Ruben Gallego and Mark Kelly on Wednesday over the ongoing government shutdown and the delayed swearing-in of Arizona Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. The senators accused Johnson of stalling Grijalva's swearing-in to block her from becoming the 218th signature that's needed to force a House vote on releasing Jeffrey Epstein-related documents. Johnson denied the claim, saying Grijalva's election occurred while the House was out of session and that she would be sworn in once Senate Democrats vote to reopen the government. Gallego accused Johnson of trying to, quote, cover up for pedophiles on the Epstein list, prompting Johnson to fire back that the allegation was, quote, totally absurd and a, quote, red herring, Politico has reported. The tense exchange underscored the deepening partisan standoff as the shutdown drags on and the House remains adjourned. After months-long manhunt, authorities have captured Derek Groves, the last of 10 inmates who escaped a New Orleans jail back in May, hiding in a crawl space beneath an Atlanta home. Groves, who was 28 years old, had been convicted of murder and was considered the most dangerous of the escapees, prompting a $50,000 reward for his capture. A SWAT team spent hours searching the house, using gas before police dogs located him. Video showed Groves smiling as officers led him away. Louisiana officials said several people who helped him evade capture may face charges, and Groves will appear in a Georgia court Thursday for extradition proceedings, the Associated Press has reported. Police also found a gun and 15 pounds of marijuana inside the home, which sits near Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta, Georgia. Here is a look at the live weather radar from the National Weather Service, and now here is the National Weather Forecast for today. Moisture from weakening tropical cyclone Priscilla will move north from the Baja Peninsula, bringing heavy rain and flash flooding risks to the southwest and Great Basin. The greatest flooding threat begins today in southeastern California, southwestern Arizona, southern Nevada, and southwestern Utah, shifting east by Friday. Terrain-sensitive areas such as burn scars and slot canyons face the highest danger. Along the southeast and mid-Atlantic coast, strong winds will create high surf, dangerous rip currents, and potential coastal flooding as a low-pressure system forms off Florida this weekend. Cooler than average temperatures will spread across the eastern United States, while warmer conditions persist in the plains and the west before a Pacific system brings cooler weather and rain to the west coast. The UK's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Mumbai on Thursday during his first visit to India, aimed at strengthening trade and business ties. The meeting comes after the UK and India signed a landmark trade deal in July, expected to boost the UK's GDP by £4.8 billion annually and increase bilateral trade by £25.5 billion by the year 2040. Starmer, leading the largest ever UK trade delegation to India, also met with a founder of India's digital ID system as the United Kingdom moves forward with plans for its own digital ID program. The visit featured announcements including 3 new Bollywood films set to be made in the United Kingdom, while both nations prepare to reduce tariffs on goods ranging from Scotch whiskey to Indian textiles, the BBC has reported. Modi called the trip historic, as Starmer emphasized expanding trade and cultural links amid ongoing global trade tensions involving the United States and India. An agitated bear caused chaos in a grocery store in Japan, injuring 2 men and frightening dozens of shoppers, officials reported on Wednesday. The 4.5-foot bear entered the store for about 4 minutes, damaging glass, knocking over produce, and struggling to find an exit. Separately, another man was found dead after a suspected bear attack, while another incident included a farmer being bitten and a Spanish tourist attacked in another area. Experts attribute the rise in bear encounters to factors such as climate change, affecting food and hibernation patterns, as well as Japan's shrinking, aging population, leaving rural areas more accessible to wildlife, CBS News has reported. Between April and September, 108 people were injured by bears nationwide, and last year saw a record 219 attacks, including 6 deaths, highlighting the growing challenge of balancing human safety with expanding bear populations. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un praised the legacy of the Workers' Party of Korea ahead of its 80th anniversary, as delegations from China, Russia, and Vietnam arrived in Pyongyang for celebrations. Chinese Premier Li Qiang, Russian delegation led by former President Dmitry Medvedev, and Vietnam's Communist Party chief To Lam attended, with Lam's visit marking the first by a Vietnamese party leader in nearly 20 years. Kim toured the party founding museum and delivered a speech honoring the party's founders, including his grandfather Kim Il-sung, calling for the current generation to uphold revolutionary duties and maintain the party's ideological purity. The anniversary comes shortly after Kim appeared with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at a Beijing parade commemorating the end of World War II, reinforcing his diplomatic ties, Reuters has reported. South Korean officials have noted signs that North Korea may also hold a military parade this week to mark the historic milestone. The United Nations will reduce its peacekeeping forces and operations, forcing 13,000 to 14,000 personnel to return home in the coming months due to U.S. funding cuts, a senior UN official has said. The reductions, representing roughly 25% of the deployed peacekeepers, will affect missions in countries including Congo, South Sudan, Lebanon, Cyprus, and Kosovo, and slash the force's budget by about 15% this year. U.S. officials, including Ambassador Mike Waltz, argue the cuts aim to streamline the UN and focus on core peacekeeping functions, part of a broader America First review that has already reduced U.S. contributions to agencies like UNESCO and the World Health Organization. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that peacekeeping remains a cost-effective tool for global security, representing only 0.5% of worldwide military spending, the Associated Press reported. The United States will contribute $680 million to 9 key missions, down from $1 billion last year, while China has committed to paying its full share of the peacekeeping budget. Australian and Indian defense ministers signed a new bilateral security agreement on Thursday aimed at strengthening Indo-Pacific stability. Indian defense minister became the first from his country to visit Australia since 2013, meeting his counterpart to formalize the deal. The agreement establishes a forum for joint staff talks and submarine rescue cooperation, reflecting growing defense ties, highlighted by India's first participation in the Talisman Sabre military exercises back in July. Analysts note the pact allows India to balance strategic relations with the United States while addressing security concerns about China, leveraging multilateral partnerships like the Quad, the Associated Press has reported. The move complements Australia's broader regional security efforts, including a recent defense treaty with Papua New Guinea, its only alliance-level pact besides ANZUS. Madagascar's president has given himself 1 year to resolve the country's challenges, pledging to resign if problems persist. This during a town hall-style meeting with government supporters. The dialogue comes amid ongoing protest led by the youth movement Gen Z Mara, which has rejected engagement, accusing the government of repression and human rights abuses. The president of Madagascar promised that ongoing power projects would add 265 megawatts to the national grid to address frequent outages, a key protest grievance, while emphasizing solutions require honest dialogue rather than street protest. The demonstrations, which began on September the 25th over power and water shortages, have expanded to concerns about corruption, unemployment, and rising living costs, the BBC has reported. Despite the protest, daily life in much of the capital continues, though clashes with security forces have left at least 22 dead and many injured, this according to the United Nations. Spanish police have dismantled one of the world's largest cocaine trafficking networks, seizing 10 tons of the drug and arresting 5 suspects in a joint operation with Colombian authorities. 3 arrests were made in Spain and 2 in Colombia during 7 raids, though officials did not disclose exact locations or where the drugs were found. The network reportedly smuggled around 120 tons of cocaine annually from Colombia to Europe via ports in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Spain, and had ties to Colombia's Clan del Golfo criminal group. The traffickers used shell companies, frontmen, and complex smuggling schemes, with leaders coordinating operations from Colombia, Spain, and Dubai, DPA International has reported. Investigators also uncovered a $700 million money laundering operation through offshore firms and cryptocurrency, aided by access to encrypted Sky ECC messages in a probe launched in 2022, codenamed Golupa. Ethiopia has accused Eritrea of plotting war in alliance with a hardline faction of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, warning in a letter to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres that the collusion has intensified in recent months. The Ethiopian government alleges that Eritrea and the TPLF are funding and directing armed groups in the region, including Fano militias, which are increasingly targeting the federal government. Tensions center on Ethiopia's bid to regain access to the Red Sea, which Eritrea has controlled since its 1993 independence, and follows decades of conflict, including the 1998 to 2000 border war and the recent Tigray clashes. Eritrea's information minister dismissed Ethiopia's claims as, quote, bizarre, while Ethiopia maintains that the alliance threatens national stability and regional security, the BBC has reported. The accusations highlight a worsening crisis as Ethiopia faces internal insurgencies and a growing contest over strategic Red Sea access. At least 14 soldiers were killed and several injured in South Sudan after a shootout erupted within the Unified VIP Protection Force over a suspected, quote, love triangle at a market. The clash involved officers aligned with President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar, whose ongoing political rivalry has destabilized the country since their 2018 peace deal. The violence spread to checkpoints and barracks, with one civilian reportedly caught in the crossfire. South Sudan faces growing insecurity, with nearly 2,000 civilian deaths just this year, increased recruitment of armed forces, and 321,000 people displaced, CBS News has reported. While the Army called the incident personal rather than politically motivated, it underscores the fragility of the nation's peace and the risk of renewed civil war. Today is October the 9th, 2025, and on this day in history, in the year 1888, the Washington Monument was officially opened to the public. In the year 1986, the Phantom of the Opera debuted in London's West End, and in the year 2004, Afghanistan held its first ever direct presidential election. The official day for October the 9th is Leif Erikson Day. Alright, it's 21 past the hour, and here's a quick market update. Gold is down 0.56%, Oil is down 1.03%. Bitcoin is down 1.63%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 0.46%. The S&P 500 is down 0.37%. And the Nasdaq is down 0.44%. And now here are your top U.S. national news stories for today. A video of Democratic gubernatorial candidate and former California Representative Katie Porter threatening to walk out of a CBS News interview over questions about appealing to Republican voters has drawn widespread attention and criticism from rivals. The tense exchange occurred when reporter Julia Watts asked Porter how she would win over the 40% of California voters who supported Donald Trump. Porter, appearing frustrated, questioned the premise that she needed Republican votes to win in a heavily Democratic state, saying she expected to win the non-Trump vote and held up her hands, calling the interview, quote, unnecessarily argumentative. She ultimately stayed and completed the interview, The Guardian has reported. Senate Republicans rejected a bill that would have limited President Trump's ability to use military force against drug cartels, with the vote largely along party lines at 48 to 51. The resolution would have required congressional approval for further strikes, which the White House justifies by labeling traffickers as armed combatants threatening the United States. So far, President Trump's campaign has destroyed 4 vessels, killed at least 21 people, and stopped narcotics from reaching America. Republicans are seeking more details on the legal basis and the conduct of the strikes, while Democrats argue they violate U.S. and international laws, the Associated Press has reported. Though the legislation failed, it allowed lawmakers to formally voice objections to the president's assertion of war powers. House Speaker Mike Johnson criticized Senate Democrats on Wednesday for blocking a government funding stopgap, emphasizing the real-world impact in their states. He highlighted Georgia Senators Warnock and Ossoff, who he said have voted 5 times to keep the government closed, affecting families and food bank access. Johnson also called out New Hampshire Senators Shaheen and Hassan for votes that have kept national parks closed. He warned of broader consequences, including strain on air traffic controllers and aviation safety amid unpaid work, Politico has reported. Meanwhile, a 6th Senate vote on competing stopgap bills is expected to fail, with negotiations stalled and no end to the shutdown in sight. A protest in Boston on Tuesday night led to 4 officers being injured and 13 people being arrested. Demonstrators moved from Boston Common to Tremont and Winter Street around 7 p.m., where they allegedly assaulted officers, kicked a police cruiser, blocked traffic, and set off smoke bombs. Police arrested 8 men and 5 women in connection with the incident. 2 of the injured officers were hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries. WJAR NBC 10 has reported. The situation highlighted tensions between law enforcement and protesters during the demonstration. California will become the first state to phase out certain ultra-processed foods from school meals under a new law signed by Governor Gavin Newsom. The legislation bans ultra-processed foods of concern from school breakfasts and lunches, with a 10-year timeline for full implementation by 2035. The state public health department will identify which foods meet the definition, considering additives, high levels of saturated fat, sodium, or added sugar, and scientific evidence of health risks. Lawmakers emphasize the law's bipartisan support and its focus on improving children's physical, mental, and emotional health, NBC News has reported. The move builds on previous California efforts to limit additives in school meals and aligns with a broader national push to make school food healthier. A woman in her 60s died after riding Disneyland's Haunted Mansion on Monday evening in Anaheim, California. Anaheim police said she became unresponsive around 6:30 p.m., and Disneyland security performed CPR until paramedics arrived. She was transported to a local hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Officials indicated the incident appeared to be a medical episode, with no issues reported with the ride, which reopened shortly afterward, Fox News has reported. The Orange County Sheriff Coroner will determine the official cause of death. The body of one of 3 skiers missing in a March avalanche in Alaska has been recovered 7 months later, authorities said on Tuesday. David Linder, Charles Eppard, and Jeremy Leaf were skiing near Gridwood when an avalanche buried them under 40 to 100 feet of snow. Recovery had been delayed due to hazardous conditions and ongoing avalanche risks. Volunteers located one skier's remains, which were transported to the state medical examiner for identification. The man had been caught in a log jam under the avalanche site, CBS News has reported. Search efforts for the 2 remaining skiers are ongoing. The Senate failed for the 6th time on Wednesday to advance funding bills to end the government shutdown, with the GOP measure falling 54 to 45, short of the 60 votes needed. No new Democrats supported the bill, which had already passed the House. House Speaker Mike Johnson said the House would not act further and urged Senate Democrats to support the measure to reopen the government. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer insisted Republicans must negotiate on expiring health care tax credits before Democrats would back any funding bill, CBS News has reported. Both parties continued to trade blame as the shutdown persists. A Nebraska woman is suing Kansas City's haunted house, The Beast, after allegedly breaking both ankles during a stunt called the Beast Jump. Leslie Blake claims she followed staff instructions to jump from a second-story window onto an inflatable air pad, which she says was underinflated, poorly positioned, and lacked proper supervision or warnings. The lawsuit alleges Full Moon Productions, which operates the attraction, knew or should have known about the risks, citing prior injuries linked to the same jump. Blake accuses the company of negligence and recklessness, seeking over $75,000 in damages, plus court costs and interest, Fox 4 Kansas City has reported. Full Moon Productions promotes its attractions as safe, with fire marshals, security, and monitoring technology, and requires visitors to sign waivers before entry. 3 people were killed Wednesday in a series of shootings in the Houston area, linked to a gunman who later died by suicide. The first victim, a woman in Sugar Land, was found with multiple gunshot wounds in her SUV. She had been in a relationship with the shooter. About 30 minutes later, the gunman shot a mechanic at an auto shop 6 miles away and then killed a witness filming nearby. Authorities later found the shooter dead from a self-inflicted gunshot inside his vehicle, NBC News has reported. Investigators are still working to determine the motive for the second and the third killings. Okay, everybody, that is our show for today. I hope you all have enjoyed it. Real quick, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on all of our news updates. And I will see everybody tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time for another episode of The News with BC. And until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful day.